Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today we're looking at one of my Phalaenopsis orchid. This one is a primary hybrid. It's a cross between cornu, cervi, and pantheria. I've had this orchid for I think almost 4 years, if not 4. It's always been a relatively reliable bloomer. In fact, every year since it became mature, it has bloomed every single year. It's a sequential bloomer, so all the spikes, this year it gave me 1 new spike, I believe, and the rest of the spikes are existing spikes. And when I first got it, it was a very small plant. It was near a mature size plant, and then it became mature, it started to flower, and ever since then it has shown me a lot of really vigorous sign. This is a really hardy orchid because I never really done anything too special to this orchid, and it just kept growing roots, leaves, and multiple spikes. This orchid is not fragrant, and it's currently in semi-hydro setup. If I ever need to repot this orchid, I may choose to drill holes at the bottom, but right now it's in semi-hydro, but because it already has roots in the reservoir area, so I only give it 1/4 cup of water every time, and that 1/4 cups tend to kind of just fill the reservoir to about half. So a month later, the buds that were developing have now all opened. So this is just a second video clip to give you a view into how this orchid did. It's a very, very vigorous bloomer too. This year it has many more flowers than last year, and it produced 2 new leaves, and it grew a lot more roots too. I know last year I already talked about wanting to repot this orchid and use that opportunity to pot the area roots into the new container, but I didn't do it because it was just still growing and doing so well, and I said to myself, if it's not broken, why fix it? So this orchid has always been placed on the top level of my rack so that these aerial roots would just kind of dangle along on the side. It used to be on the mid-level rack, but then it's just taking up too much horizontal space, and also how the spikes are growing, it's also taking a lot of horizontal space. So my plan is, if I don't repot this orchid this year, at least I would have to somehow find a way to train the flower spike, or just, use a couple of sticks to prop the spikes so that they're more upwards than pendant. So that way I get to save some horizontal space. And then if I ever repot this orchid, I would definitely try to find a way to get those area roots into a new container, probably a bigger container. And I would drill holes at the bottom so that I can convert this orchid from semi-hydro to a traditional setup, but then use the double cup method that I'm using for most of my orchids. And with that double cup method, it gives me flexibility to go between semi-hydro and traditional setup, where drainage holes are at the bottom. In terms of care, this orchid receives quarter strength fertilizer, and I tend to give this orchid 1/4 cup every single time. Only during winter months, sometimes I do reduce the water by another 50%, so that would mean about 1/8 of a cup. And this orchid is pretty drought tolerant, and in fact I would even say that for cornu cervi type of orchids, they seem to prefer drier condition than more wet condition. So that's kind of how I observe and how I think these because I have other 2 cornu cervi type orchids, and they also seem to do relatively well when actually when they're not too wet. And one thing funny about this orchid is historically the videos I have done on this orchid has never received too big of a viewership, and I suspect it's because the look of the orchid just don't resonate with most people. And I don't blame you, because the reason I even got this orchid was because it was cheap. And at that time, I was also in the phase of wanting to get more orchids with interesting patterns on their flowers. Like, you know, for example, Luda Mañana has markings, and then the Luda Mañana hybrids. And then I came across this one, so I said to myself, you know what, the marking is interesting enough, so I will get it. I knew nothing about cornu cervi or pantheria. I just knew that I was interested in the marking. But after having had this orchid for some time, after I'm kind of done with the whole, you know, phase of wanting orchids with interesting markings or patterns on the flowers, now I'm just like, okay, it's a sequential bloomer, it's vigorous, and it's hardy. But other than that, you know, it doesn't have any fragrance, and the leaves don't have any special interesting characteristics other than, well, its root production is quite amazing, and it has some crazy area roots. Other than that, I can't really tell you anything special. Okay, so maybe there's one thing special about this orchid. It's the flower spike. It's kind of flat. It's not round like most Phalaenopsis orchid, and in Asia they call this type of orchid antler orchids, because the way that they look, somehow they think that it looks like antlers from deers, from animals' antlers. So that's one interesting aspect of this orchid. But other than that, I don't know what else to tell you about, you know, the draw toward this orchid. But overall, I'm still pretty happy with it. When this orchid is not in bloom, I sometimes actually move it to my dining table, because it makes a pretty good centerpiece, I would say, because of the way its flower spikes are growing, and then also the area roots. But pretty soon I'm going to change it, because it's really taking a lot of horizontal space. Previously, I also received a question about somebody who also have a cornu cervi, and this person was telling me that the flower spikes are still green, but it hasn't flowered. What can he do to induce the bloom? And my answer is, and my personal preference is, you know, just go with the flow, assuming the orchid is perfectly healthy and the care is still adequate. Then just let it do its thing. When the time is right, it will bloom. That's how I would do it, because I don't want to have to do anything major to potentially set it back if I don't do it correctly. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video.